Hello AP World students. I've created this short video for you as a tutorial covering the second free response question you'll see on the AP exam. It's the continuity and change over time question. As you can read in this paragraph, students are asked to identify both continuities and changes in topics such as trade, technology, gender, environment, political structures, warfare. Students struggle the most with this essay. In 2012, the average score was between a 2 and a 3 out of 9 points. So it is a difficult essay, but again, the purpose of this tutorial is to try to give you a couple of strategies so that you are better prepared, so that you are more confident when you are approaching this essay question. To better understand what this question is asking you to do, you should first understand the language that you will find in the question prompt. You're going to be asked to specifically look for changes or continuities. And so think about, what do those words mean? What is a definition? And then what are close synonyms for those words? Because if we can identify synonyms, that might spark other associations or other examples of changes and continuities. Maybe some changes that you want to think about would be transform, shape, adjust, adapt, or even evolve. Other synonyms for continuity might be flow, progression, uninterrupted, unchanging, or staying the same. Down here in part B, I want you to think about, in your own words, how would you describe what you are being asked to do if you are asked to address changes? Again, in your own words, what would you do if you are being asked to address continuities? Using those synonyms, using that definition, use those words to help you define your task so that you better understand what you are being asked to do. And then lastly, think about what would happen if you only addressed continuities and did not address changes. How do you think that would affect your grade? If you're thinking that it would negatively impact your grade, you're absolutely correct, as we will see when we take a look at the rubric. This is a copy of the grading rubric that scorers use when they look at your exam. And over on the left-hand side here we have the basic core. And this is focusing on an acceptable thesis for 1 point, addressing all parts of the question, so that means addressing both continuities and changes, and that's for 2 points. So if we have a good thesis and we address both parts of the question, both continuity and change, you can get 3 points. So those are the points I want to focus on right away here. The next thing you want to look for is historical evidence. You should look for a minimum of 5 pieces of historical evidence in order to get these 2 points. Next, we want to look for relevant world historical context. We want to put this in a global context and find out, how do these continuities and changes affect or impact, how are they related to another region in the world? And so you do that for 1 point. And then you analyze the processes of change or continuity and identify, why is it significant? Why does it happen? Okay, what causes this to happen? And again, those are for the basic core points. If you do all of those things, then you open yourself up to the expanded core. Now, this is a handout that I had given you in class, and it is sort of what I would term the strategies for success. I've given you the purpose of this essay, and first off, you have to manage your time. You will have approximately 40 minutes to work on this essay, depending how much you spend or don't spend on the other essays. It is recommended that you spend about 5 minutes brainstorming, and that will leave you plenty of time for your writing and revising. To begin with, we should read the question and circle, annotate key words or phrases. Look for your time, look for your place, look for what you're being asked to do, the topic, what should you focus on. And once you have identified all of that information from the question prompt, then you can think about the continuities and the changes, and see if you can come up with 3. You don't need 3, but 3 is a good rule of thumb. If you only have 2 continuities and 1 change, that will work as long as you have some of both. Now once you have identified your place, your geographic region, your task, your topic, and your time, and you've come up with your continuities and changes, then you can plug that information in to your thesis. Okay? And this here is the thesis prompt that I want you all to memorize. Okay? This is the thesis statement. This is the model, and you're just going to fill in the missing information. So during the time period between X and Y, between say 500 and 1450, in a geographical region with this topic, maybe it's changes in political structures, these things remain constant, stayed the same, while there were significant changes in this, this, and this. Again, you don't need 3 items, but at least have one of each of them. And then here's an example of a thesis statement that includes all of this information. The next thing that you'll want to do is to identify your historical evidence. And again, you want to identify at least 5 pieces of evidence. And the purpose of this evidence is that it should directly support your continuities and changes that you are identifying, that you are writing about. Okay, so each of these must be very specific, and they certainly must be accurate so that they support your thesis statement. And then for one point, you want to put this in the world historical context. What else is happening in the world during this time that might explain or understand some of these continuities and changes that are taking place? The last thing that you're going to do is your analysis. And what is simply identify what caused those changes. Why did some things remain the same? This is significant because, this changed over time because, or this did not change because. So again, you want to look for your thesis, include all of the essential information in your thesis statement, have historical evidence, place it in the world historical context, and analyze it. And if you do all of those things, you should have all of the basic core points and be on your way to getting expanded core points. Here's an example of the continuity and change over time question from the 2012 AP World exam. And as you can see, the directions are given to you here, and you're asked to identify the same things that we just went over. It's advised you spend 5 minutes organizing, and then you have the rest of your time to write your essay. Again, you need a relevant thesis that is supported with historical evidence. So that thesis is the first thing, it's the most important thing of your whole essay. So make sure that you memorize that model, and then when you're given your question, you can just fill in the missing information. You must address all parts of the question. So in other words, you have to talk about both continuity and change, not one or the other. Even if only one is really specified, discuss both of them, always, to be safe. The next thing is to place this in the world historical context, and then analyze those processes over time. This is an example of a student response to that exact same question from the 2012 essay. This was provided by the College Board for us to analyze and to better prepare ourselves for the upcoming exam. This is the introduction, this is the first paragraph, and so as you look at this, you should be able to identify a thesis statement. In this case, the student didn't just have one sentence as a thesis, they had multiple sentences for the thesis statement. But if you read this carefully, you're going to find they have specified the time period, they've identified several changes, and in the last sentence they've identified some continuity. So they have a thesis for 1 point, and they've addressed both parts of the question for 2 points. What this student did is they painted a picture of the world in that region in 300. They set the scene at the beginning, and then they set the scene at the end of the time period that they were being expected to discuss. And then they say there are changes in each of these regions. So as we read this essay, I would expect to find those changes in each of those regions, and also an explanation of why things stayed the same on the northern coast of Africa. This is the first body paragraph, and as you read through this, you should be able to identify several examples of historical evidence. Moving on to the third paragraph, there's several more examples of historical evidence, and also there's a good example of world historical context down here. Discussing trade, they place it in the context of what was going on at the end of that time period that may have caused changes in Afro-Eurasian trade routes. by bringing in the idea of European exploration and how trade routes shifted towards the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so again, this is the world historical context. Equally important to including the basic requirements that you are asked in the question prompt, it is also important to have good writing. And a nice example that I found in this essay came at the beginning of this paragraph with this transition sentence. Though many aspects of trade between Africa and Eurasia changed between this time period, one stayed the same, period. Northern Africa was always a key player. This is very clear, it's very direct, it's a perfect transition sentence from our changes to our continuities. And it's separated into paragraphs, and so I expect this whole paragraph to discuss those continuities. And this is the last end of the last paragraph, which was simply their conclusion. This essay did not have a very clear conclusion as its own separate paragraph. Depending upon your time that you have to write, you can either include or not include that. It would be nice because you can restate your thesis and you can wrap up, neatly tie together everything you have discussed. What I'm showing you here is feedback from the College Board on this specific question and student's response. They gave the student a score of 8, and here they explain why. First off, it had a valid thesis, so it got 1 point. It addressed both continuity and change for 2 points, and there were 7 specific and accurate pieces of historical evidence that explained the continuity and changes over time. There was relevant world historical context that helped to explain it. In fact, they mentioned it twice in the second paragraph. And there was multiple analyses of change with regards to the question. And so they had done all of these things, and they gave them 1 extra point for the expanded core, giving them a total of 9. So again, if you look at your rubric and the things that you are asked to identify, if you use that rubric as sort of a checklist, then you are setting yourself up for success. What I would like you guys to do is to evaluate the other 2 student essays and assign a score for each of them. I gave you a packet of 3 essays. We've gone over the first one together. Be ready to defend your score, discuss the good and bad parts of each essay next class. On your test next week, you'll be given a prompt and have to create a thesis statement with supporting evidence. I would also like you to try practicing creating thesis statements given continuity and change over time question prompts. For this one, you're asked to trace the changes and continuities in world trade from 500 BCE to 1000 CE, so over 1500 years, in any one of the following regions. Okay, the nice thing about this is that you are able to choose from any one of these regions. So of course, choose the one that you are most comfortable with, that you have the most historical evidence to support. I have this question prompt, and on the next 2 slides I have 2 more question prompts. So take a look at them and start practicing. Again, the more you practice, the more confident you're going to be when you do these questions, and then ultimately when you are taking the exam. Also, completing and practicing these questions is a good way to review the larger themes for each of these historical time periods, which of course will help you on all parts of the AP exam. So email me with any questions, and good luck.